Hey guys, and welcome back to the Renaissance Room podcast. And in today's episode, I want to talk about motivation. A lot of people have been voting on my page about content and what you guys wanted to hear. And so I just thought, I've lived a little, I'm nearing that age and such. And so there's a lot of things that I've learned that I would love to share with other people. And so here we are. I just finished reading The Little Engine That Could to my kid. And I honestly am so inspired by that book. I think literacy, first of all, let me just say this. I think literacy for children is so important. And I do think you should start early, because the thing about literacy, and Bell Hooks talked about this in Rock My Soul, which I just finished up finally, okay? Literacy allows for children to imagine a better world than the one in which they're living in, right? Prayerfully, we will be present, we'll be alive, and we'll be in our children's lives to guide them. But in the event that we are not, right? Or in the event that you have children and you can't give them ideal circumstances or whatever the case may be, you never want to lose your ability to imagine a better world than your current reality, especially if your reality is plagued by suffering and an inability to choose, right? Like, you always want to be able to dream of a better tomorrow, and it's in that allows us to, or rather it allows children to detach from certain traumas, right? So she talked about this, being able to dream of a better future, right, is what gives children hope, and it gives them self-esteem, and it gives them a sense of resilience to keep going, right, despite whatever that they're living in. And for me, I shared how that was a very early experience that I had, because I learned how to read very early on. I was reading my mom's urban fiction books, and I read The Coldest Winter Ever in the 5th grade, and that book really kind of catapulted me. And it might not have been in 5th grade. It might have been 7th grade. But I was young, or maybe it was 6th grade. But I just remember that book taking me to a different world, and I remember just being so engaged with the characters. And for the first time in my life, I think it was, was her name Winter? I think it was actually Winter. From her perspective, she was so empowered. You know what I mean? She was so empowered. And I think that did something for me as a Black girl. You know what I mean? Even though that book was obviously not age appropriate, but it did something for me in terms of my reality. And I just think that you want to teach children how to read so that they can imagine a better world. And so as I was reading to my kid, I was reading The Little Engine That Could. I just felt so inspired by that book, One, it deals with the issues of doubt and being overlooked. And this is something that I think is so crushing in our community, especially as African American men and women, because when you prioritize materialism above all things, right? And I don't want to, let me just say this, because I think that this is something that we have to say, right? We talk about nuance and complexity and all those different things, and I get all that, I really do. But let me just say this, right? When you become an adult, you absolutely should be responsible for yourself, okay? You may not have a certain level of comfort. You may not desire a certain level of material comfort, but at the end of the day, your lot is your choosing. You know what I mean? There is some element of self-agency concerning our possessions and our positions in life, okay? And so I think, we're in this culture where it's eat the rich, all of that. And I get it. I know we're talking about corporate CEOs and business tycoons, and we're not really talking about small people here. But I just think that sometimes these conversations around money and wealth and, its demonization can really make a lot of people falter in terms of self-sufficiency and really building a life that you're proud of. You know what I mean? You can absolutely work hard, and some things could possibly work out for you if you play your cards right. Okay. That's just life. And I just think that, we kind of have to get back to accepting the reality and maturing, and right, and recognizing that at the end of the day, there are always going to be people who have more than you, right? I feel like that's kind of one of the fallacies of this liberal type of thinking that's progressive. It's this attitude of we should all be equal, we should all have the same things, and it's just not realistic. There are always going to be people who have more than you, and what we typically focus on is those who have more than us. When we come on and we advocate and we're so big in advocacy, and we fail to realize that there are people that have less than us, and we have a lot more than other people, and sometimes it doesn't look like materialism. Sometimes it looks like certain favorable experiences, right? We know God, per se, if you're a Christian, right? It's no respecter of persons. But at the end of the day, there are certain things that worked out for you that didn't work out for that person. You know what I mean? There are certain storms that some people have walked through and they absolutely were consumed by them. So I just think when we start talking about wealth, we have to start looking at things on a soul level. And I think that was Bell Hooks' entire premise in terms of like Black people and self-esteem, because we know that we do fall a little short in terms of economics within this white supremacist nation. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, there is some element to our lives that we absolutely can't control. And so when I say, we feel overlooked by our materialism, we do have to reckon with the fact that, hey, listen, if we did not work for certain things, if we did not, try at certain things or whatever the case may be, we do have to accept the fact that there is going to be a level of incompatibility. You know what I mean? And I don't think that means you're less worthy of a person. It just means that this is an incompatibility. You know why it's an incompatibility? Not because it has to do with inherent worth. It's nothing internal, right? This is why we say we don't take things personal, because it's not personal. The reason why it's an incompatibility is because when we walk different paths in life, okay, it makes something of you. It changes you, right? So when you're on this path, and let's say you took a collegiate journey and you're a lawyer and you're someone and maybe you didn't take that journey, right? You didn't take that path and you don't have that level of like prestige in regards to your profession, and you don't carry that level of responsibility within your work. And let's say, for example, you don't necessarily have that level of income, and, you don't have that sense of pride or whatever in what you do. Like, your job is a job, but for this person it's more of a profession, and it's kind of like, so I just think that there's an incompatibility, and there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean that you are not worthy. That just means there's an incompatibility. And I think instead of us accepting the fact that sometimes we're incompatible with things and our desires, and certain things just don't work out, and we don't just get things because we want them and we feel like the world should be equal, right? That's one of the fallacies also about being in a generation where you have a bunch of young kids who are at the forefront of our conversations, right? They're online, they're advocating, they're doing the cultural commentary, but they don't really have the wisdom. You know what I mean? So they're really being like hard pressed, and they're gaining a lot of following with certain ideals and ideologies. And though the ideas are good, they're oftentimes immature. Right? They're immature and they're underdeveloped because life just isn't fair. And that's just the reality. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't necessarily mean anyone is worthy or, deserving of punishment. That's the opposite token of that. Right? And so I just wanted to go ahead and premise that, because I do think that oftentimes, we have these conversations and it's like people just want it to be like everybody gets a slice of cake, and we should all get a slice of cake. But the reality is that it's one cake. We're all going to get different sizes, and I know it's, like I said, conversations about, corporate tycoons. That's a different conversation. And I know people are advocating for that, and that's valid. You know what I mean? That's very real. We should be out here advocating against corporate greed. Okay. But we also have to kind of recognize that some people within our proxy, whether it's entrepreneurs, small business owners, others in, certain professions, they do deserve some level of like reverence and, respect for the work that they've done. And they don't deserve to be kind of looped in with this sense of demonization because they've acquired some level of material gain. Okay. Some people just took different paths in life, and we know now that that is just life, and that is the reality, and that some of us will have more than others. And that's just the way the game go, So anyway, I wanted to preface that. So reading The Little Engine That Could, and thinking about how, sometimes in life we feel overlooked, and how at the end of the book, she says, I thought I could. And so, ultimately she did. She got him up the mountain. And like, the book was so inspiring to me because, one, that's really what life is about. I think we have to get back to the fundamentals of like spirituality, which is a little bit more of the metaphysical, right? And I think in philosophy, this is the ontological practice, which is like the study of being, right? Existing as humans, we actually have the opportunity to like, not necessarily manifest, but, we're connected with God in that sense of creation, right? And so I think we have to get back to, thinking positively, thinking positive about one another, thinking positive about ourselves, about our lives, about our futures. You know what I mean? Like, I know right now, I don't know what it is. I think something about doom and gloom kind of became like a trend. You know what I mean? Like, doom and gloom became a trend. I asked you guys this on a poll. I said, hey, do y'all think that with all this criticism in regards to like culture and, celebrities and lifestyles and influence culture, whatever the case may be, do you guys think that this is making people unhappy? And y'all said, no, I have to disagree. I think that it absolutely does make people unhappy because it robs people of the ability to create, of to hope, and to aspire. You know what I mean? To aspire. And for a lot of African Americans and for, a lot of people, we are starting at ground zero for a multitude of reasons. It's not all, racism, but, for a multitude of reasons. Okay. And so for a lot of us, we absolutely do desire material comfort. We do desire to, eradicate poverty within our lives. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But when you come out and you constantly having all this criticism, you're going to have a lot of people, especially women, especially women who are going to feel guilty for being successful. You know what I mean? You know how long I've struggled with just being intelligent and feeling a little nerdy and like not, desirable and all those different things. Like there's a lot of constructs that I think exist, within our lives and the framework that the frameworks that we have to navigate in these Black bodies. You know what I mean? And so I just think that now it's time to be a little bit more conscious in our conversation. You know what I mean? Let's not get online and just rattle off at the mouth. You know what I mean? I know we're going to critique systems and all those things, but we also have to give space to the youth to feel a sense of optimism for the world, that they're living in, that they're existing in. Because when we don't, we give leeway to corporations and their greed to meet that need, which is to say, hey, let's go ahead and create an alternate reality online, whether it, instead of saying, hey, listen, let's teach our kids literacy. Okay, that way they're not going to be, subjected to certain propaganda. They're not going to be subjected to, Meta and Zuckerberg and Musk and all their different, technological advancements that essentially meet the need, of their consumers. Like, I just think that we have to kind of get back to being a little bit more optimistic. I'm just being honest. You know what I mean? That's not toxic optimism. I do believe that, in order to be someone who is courageous, I do think it's actually to dream with their eyes wide open. I felt like when I started to look at my life and dream with my eyes wide open, when I got rid of all of my illusions, right? When I realized like, oh my God, this is my life. These are the choices I made. This is where I'm standing. These are some of the things that have happened to me in which I was a victim. You know what I mean? But this is what I'm going to do about it. This is where I'm standing. I'm at a crossroads. And I realized that the dreams I had about being a writer, being in New York, this is not going to happen, right? First of all, it was probably never going to happen because I was so far away from that. I realized that dream had to start in the 6th grade. You know what I mean? That started with writing programs and scripts, the scripts, news, media, internships, and all these connections that I just didn't have. You know what I mean? And even if you could say, well, maybe it didn't have to go that way. My premise is, hey, listen, at the end of the day, we were far from that. Okay. And so you got to be able to see your life for what it is. Okay. You know what I mean? And then you have to pick up from there and hold your life with such truth and such radical honesty. Right. And then from there you dream. It's not until you really get to that point that your dream can even become a reality, because right now you're stuck in delusion. You're saying things like, I want to be a billionaire, while simultaneously you're critiquing the billionaires. You know what I mean? Like, you're not in alignment. You want wealth, but you're critiquing wealth. You know what I mean? You want material comfort, but you're critiquing material comfort. You know what I mean? Like, you're not in alignment. So you're all over the place. Okay. And that's okay. I've been there as well. But to kind of sort through and sift through some of that chaos, you got to get back to the optimism. Sometimes it's okay to tune out a lot of the cultural commentary that's very negative. Because that's what's really popular right now. And it started that way a while ago. Talk is cheap. It's easy to get online and critique somebody, start a page and become the person who's the spokesperson about things that we're all thinking. Because, being a hater is all right today. You know what I mean? Being a hater had become normalized back in like 2023, post-pandemic. It was like super normalized to be a hater. You know what I mean? People were creating pages with floating images with all this commentary in the voice memos. You know what I mean? Like floating images on a YouTube channel with nothing but commentary in the background of them being a hater. You know what I mean? No avatar, because today you could just say things so freely. There's no sense of integrity about online. It's like, it's fair game, So at the end of the day, I just wanted to get on here and say that, you know what I mean? If you think you can do something and you think you can be something, you really can. I do believe that, but I do believe that your journey is going to take not the path in which you think it's going to take. I think it's going to actually take a very long time, because I think it takes a long time to build something, and I think looking at life in terms of it being a thing where we exist with such longevity, you know what I mean, then I think you can have a little bit more optimism to create a future that you can be proud of, and to become a person you can be proud of, and to have the things that you've always dreamt. Now, let's be realistic, okay? Now, let me reel you back in, all right? You're always going to be longing for something if that's just who you are as a person, okay? There are going to be certain things in life you're never going to be able to afford. You know what I mean? You got to accept that, you know? And if you can't accept that, then you need to be a little bit more mindful of how you engage with social media and what it is that you're setting your eyes on. That's called like discipline. Back to what I was saying about self-agency and having a little bit more self-governance with yourself. Like sometimes we have to be like, okay, I have to be the one to discipline me, right? You're talking about parenting yourself. That's not always, oh God, you know, it's so not, you know, cuddle, you know, kiss. Like that's not always what that looks like. Sometimes that looks like, okay, snap out of it. You have to be the disciplinarian. You have to step in and be like, okay, listen, you're not watching that because you don't know how to act. You know what I mean? So, you know, that's just what it is. So at the end of the day, I just want to leave you guys with that. And I just hope that this inspires y'all to dream. I hope that this inspires you to look at your life, look at your failures, look at where you want to go, look at what's really, you know, within your reach, what's in alignment with you, what is something that you're good at that you've always wanted to do. And even if it doesn't make you money, like this podcast doesn't make me any money, you know, would you still do it? You know, you have to build a sense of discipline with anything that you do, you know what I mean, before you even start making money with it anyway, because, you know, if you don't love it, then it just gets whack, you know, and you'll see that, like I said, to be real or to be relevant, people be creating things and saying things out the side of their neck because they just started too soon. You know, they didn't really build that muscle. It's not real. It doesn't hit the same. You're not interested, you know? So anyway, that was probably a bad example, but anyway, I hope that you guys got something from this. I hope y'all have a wonderful, wonderful day. And, you know, just know at the end of the day, like you can really be something in life. You can be something that you're proud of. You know what I mean? Like, and whatever that is for you, just be willing to put in the work, be willing to take your time, and, you know, have your self-esteem intact before you get there. You're still worthy. You know what I mean? You're still worthy. Like, you got to know, though, that it's going to be some delayed gratification. I think, like I said, it's so much about the process of becoming that sometimes the people that you meet along the way are just that. They're the people that you meet along the way. They're not the ones that are going to be there with you upon your arrival. They're not the ones awaiting your arrival. That's a better way to say that, you know, and that's okay. You know what I mean? That gives you something to look forward to. And I understand that, you know, sometimes hope can disappoint us and it can let us down. But I think as African-American people, we are so hopeful. We are hopeful for this country. We are hopeful in everything that we do, but we are not hopeful with one another. We are not hopeful that we can heal, that we can, you know, grow, that we can dream, that we can be in harmony and community with one another, that we can make, you know, manifest and bring into fruition the ideas and dreams that God has given us. You know what I mean? So we got to start redirecting some of that hope. You know, take your power back, right? When Kamala lost, y'all was like, we packing it up. But y'all ain't packing it up, though. Y'all still outside with your lawn chairs. It's time to come inside. You know what I mean? It's raining out there. You know what I mean? Like, let's just reel it back, you know? And just trust that at the end of the day, whatever doesn't work out, if you have the mindset, this is something that's going to change your life forever. I know that sounds like some really good marketing, but I'm being serious. If you have the mindset that everything is working for you, even when you don't even understand, even when it don't even look like it, even when it's not making sense, I promise you, you will start seeing the good in every crappy thing in your life. Like anything that goes wrong, I mean, not always, but like for the most part, like if you drop your bagel on the way to work, like that probably wasn't working out for you. That actually just worked against you. You know what I mean? But little stuff like that you can deal with, you know. But like if someone, you know, let's say, for example, your relative just blows up on you randomly, you know, that's probably working to your good because you don't know where you were headed and what you had going on. And this person is just like crash out, you know, or, you know, relationships thing. Like just know that at the end of the day, most things really can work for you. If you believe it, though, you got to believe it. And the reason why the belief is so powerful is because it's how you see it. It's how you perceive it, right? Like perspective is everything. That's why you got to be so mindful and while you're, you know, unlearning and renewing your mind and cultivating a sense of optimism because, you know, everybody's fighting for your attention. And we say attention, we think it's TikTok and dancing. No, it's about perspective. You know, people, the things that they pour into you, you know, the things that they're saying, like their ideas, how they think, that is the thing that's shaping you and tailoring you in such a way. So you have to be the type of person to be like, you know what? I'm going to be so mindful. I'm going to be so selective with how I engage. And I try to tell people this all the time. I set the boundaries just quite naturally. You guys don't even know. But like, you know, you can't be so engaged with people online because you don't know me. You know what I mean? Like, I appreciate anybody who admires my work, and I'm always going to, I'm not going to say always. I'm working to receive that, if I'm being honest. You know, I'm not perfect. But, you know, at the end of the day, you guys don't know me. You know, hey, listen, that's why I don't really try to come on here with life advice, you know, because what worked for me may not work for you. You know, my beliefs is different, you know, but what I can do is from a motivational standpoint and say, hey, this is what I've learned and this is what I think can help. And I hope that that's the approach that I took with this podcast. And I hope you guys got something from it. Peace.